Here comes a new challenger!
What's up YouTube, Challenger TCG is back again with another deck profile video. My name is Villionaire, and this past weekend I attended the first large cash prize event for Riftbound in the US at the Laughing Dragon Experience in the Tacoma Convention Center. This event had a $2,000 prize pool, and I am happy to say that I finished in first place, going undefeated during Swiss and Top Cut, playing the Daughter of the Void, Kaisa. After months of training with our team online, it felt so good to finally be able to put down the mouse and pick up some real cardboard and play some cards. In this video, I will break down my tournament deck list as well as give a tournament recap covering the different matchups I encountered and how to approach them. Let's jump into it. Something to mention briefly before jumping in, we do have a Metafy now, and on that Metafy we do have a Kaisa guide for sale. I really do believe this is one of the best guides on Kaisa on the internet right now, so check us out at Challenger TCG on Metafy if you are interested in picking up that guide. If you've been following the Riftbound meta at all, I'm sure you've heard of the dominance of Kaisa. She's been the most played leader in every China major, winning 3 of the 4 regional opens, as well as just recently winning the Chinese National Open. Kaisa is a tempo deck with a lot of damage-based removal spells and card draw. These two in combination lead to having large hands full of interaction, which makes combat a nightmare for the opponent. Normally, these powerful spells cost 1 or more to use, which would set you back in tempo, as each time you're losing 1 energy every turn for the rest of the game. But thanks to your legend ability, paying those power costs for you, you get to continue to play on a standard energy curve, rather than focusing on long-term value or raw power. As a tempo deck, we aim to gain incremental leads in speed and board presence that snowball into a win. The goal is to keep the opponent responding to us and our threats rather than giving them the time to develop their own threats. This makes every unit we can establish early into a powerhouse that we can support with our combat tricks and spells to take early points and convert that into a win. What this typically means in practice is to remove your opponent's units whenever available, and if it's possible to score a point without setting yourself too far behind, it's usually correct to do so. Let's jump into the deck list. First off, we'll take a look at your legend. This ability is quite simple. You simply exhaust your legend in order to create a power. This can be a power of any color, and it can be used to play spells. This ability just lets you play all of your spells so efficiently while maintaining a really good curve and moving deeper into your rune deck to be able to cast your really top-end bombs like the Cathian Rain or the Thousand Tail Watcher. And that's exactly where you want to be. You really want to get into those high mana positions. And Kaisa lets you do that while still playing all the most powerful cards in your deck, which is something that no other deck kind of can do, which is why she kind of has this really good tempo strategy. Definitely worth noting that this can be used to pay deflect costs as well, not just if your spell has a power, but say that you're using something like a Stupefy on a deflect unit, it now is like costing a power for you to target, and Kaisa can pay those costs as well. A rune count's pretty standard, 7-5 in favor of Fury. I think that's pretty much what we're seeing across most Kaisa decks. Outside of the Thousand Tail Watcher, you don't have too many mind costs, so feel free to spend some of your blue on things like a Cathian Rains, because you really only need to have 2 up consistently unless you're trying to play Time Warp. Next, we'll look at the battlefields. The Dreaming Tree is typically the battlefield that I throw out game 1 blind, and there are a few reasons for this. There's a fair amount of decks in the game that do not play cards that target their own friendly units, and so against a lot of decks, they really are only going to have maybe 3 to 5 or 6 cards that can trigger this, whereas we are playing 8. This means on average we will be able to trigger this against our opponent more times than they'll be able to trigger it against us. That's not always the case, especially against certain matchups, but that is the idea. And secondly, what it really helps us do is open up space in our sideboard, because once we're past the Dreaming Tree, we could start trimming on cards like Cleave or Retreat or Stupefy in matchups that they're not great in, and that allows us with the maximum sideboard flexibility. Whereas if we still have our Dreaming Tree in games 2 or 3, we're going to have less access to our sideboard options in that game, because our deck is going to be much tighter because we still need to play all of these cards that trigger the Dreaming Tree. The Dreaming Tree is definitely an amazing battlefield, and it feels like a completely different game sometimes. You're just drawing so many cards with Kaisa naturally as it is, and Kaisa just has so many cheap 1-mana spells that can target friendly units. Targon's Peak is the battlefield you're going to be wanting to use when you're going first. Ensuring yourself a Conquer on this, as so long as you had a turn 1 play, is such a powerful ability, and it gives you so much mana in the early game to really threaten your opponents and develop whatever you want. Like if you played, for instance, a Watchful Sentry turn 1, you can send the sentry into the battlefield, then play your Kaisa back in your base, and then untap 2, which can threaten things like Retreat or Stupefy or Hextech Ray. It really becomes a nightmare for your opponent, and you don't really want your opponents doing this to you going first, especially if it's like a Kaisa mirror, which is why we usually run this battlefield out when we're going first. It's a pretty simple effect, but pretty powerful, especially when you have all the instant speed interaction that we have at action and reaction. You always want additional access to more mana on your opponent's turns if possible. Our third battlefield is Reaver's Row. This is the one that you throw out when you think your opponent is most likely going first. In this game, typically first, I believe, is better than second in most situations. There's very few decks that want to go second or will pick second. So assuming, let's say that you won your game 1, then you know that your opponent most likely will pick first and you can play your Reaver's Row. It's also okay going first. You're not sad about having a Reaver's Row if your opponent did pick second and you blinded this out not knowing what they're going to pick. You're not too sad about that either way. The battlefield's still fine going first. It's just the one that we typically will throw out going second. And one of the main reasons that we like to do this is because it basically acts as a free retreat on your Kaisa champion unit. And on turn 2, you'll be able to accelerate your Kaisa unit, plant her on the Reaver's Row, and there's a lot of decks that really can't answer that. Of course, against Kaisa in the mirror, they have plenty of damage removal if you're in a battlefield, so that's not something you're really trying to do in some matchups like the mirror, but in a lot of matchups, there's just a lot of decks that don't have any way to interact with that, and so this just lets you send your Kaisa home over and over and keep drawing more cards and conquering at other battlefields every turn. And typically, we're not a deck that's able to hold very well, so being able to save our units by returning them back home to use again next turn for another assault is a really powerful effect. We already talked about her a little bit, but Kaisa Survivor is your champion unit. This unit is so good. It's one of the best champion units in the whole game. Being able to just play this on 2 and not paying any power for such a strong unit with respectable stats and a powerful conquer effect is, in my opinion, one of the reasons that this deck is just so insane. Always having access to a card like this that generates more value over time, and if you ever trigger this more than once, you are just so far ahead that your opponent will rarely know what to do. She also just plays so well with Retreat, and in the mirror you're going to be doing a lot of that. She's absolutely just one of the MVPs of the deck. Getting into the main deck, we have Stupefy. This is just such a fantastic combat trick that allows your units to trade up over things while maintaining hand advantage, but it also just has so many more functionalities in Kaisa. We already mentioned the Dreaming Tree interaction, which turns this into a 1 mana draw 2 at reaction speed, which is just so freaking powerful. But the way that this spell interacts with your damage spells as well, you can combine this, for instance, with a Hextech Ray, so that by leaving up 2 mana, you're actually able to deal 4 damage at instant speed. You can even do plays like damaging your opponent's guy first, and then hitting it with a Stupefy, and if they try to retreat it or flash it away, you hit it with a Stupefy again. Because of the reaction speed and because they already have damage on them, they will just die and you'll stop their retreat. Like, it's such a flexible spell. It's only 1 mana, so it's always easy to leave up. You're always happy to play 3 of this in your deck, and there's very few decks that you'll ever sideboard these out against. Continuing the 1 mana spells, we have Cleave. Cleave is one of the best aggressive combat tricks in the game. On top of triggering your Dreaming Tree and drawing you cards, which is always excellent, this card just helps you make trades that you normally would never be able to make. For 1 mana, this makes your Ravenbloom student a 6 when it's attacking into something, which makes it trade way above its weight class. There's even some cheeky interactions with your Lecturing Yordle, in which you can make him even larger and make him tank something that normally he wouldn't be able to tank, and save the other large unit that you send with him or smaller unit that would have died without it. This is great in combination with your Darius, which for 6 mana lets you play him essentially accelerated with 10 might, which is usually enough to crack over anything or even trade with like a Deadbloom with a Master Yi pump. This is one of the first cards that I look to cut when I'm away from the Dreaming Tree, but I do think that you still might want to play a couple of these. There's still some matchups, especially the ones with really big boys, that try to stack tall units in the battlefields that this card is still a house against. So even without the Dreaming Tree, you're still going to get a lot of value out of this card. The main decks I don't really feel like I need to see this is against decks that have a lot of really small units, like say Victor, where I don't really feel like I need this combat trick in order to trade over them, and in the mirror because I'm usually not sending a unit into a battlefield that has opposing units in it. I'm usually using my removal spells to clear those out before I do that. So cleave really doesn't do much against those, and you don't have assault unless there actually is a defender. Hextech Ray is one of your best action speed removal spells. Again, like our previous spells, this is only one energy, except it can actually straight up remove a body all by itself. In the early turns, especially like going second, this card is crucial to maintaining your point advantage and your point tempo. You can play a 2-cost unit and still leave up 1, and then when your opponent sends their turn 1 play into a battlefield, which is usually never larger than 3, this spell just lets you kill it, prevents them from scoring a point, and takes a body off their board all at the same time for just the low cost of 1 mana. You can also combine this with your other damage spells, of course. This card is just really flexible, and you usually want to keep these in against almost every deck. The only matchup where I'm not really fond of this card is maybe against like dazzling Aurora decks or really massive ramp decks, because deal 3 against something with like 9 or 10 might is not all that much. Our final 1-cost spell is Retreat. I was pretty low on this card when I first started playing the game. I've started to come around to it more so in Kaisa than in other decks, specifically because of its interaction with our champion unit and how good this card is in the mirror. I am on 2 copies, but I could totally see playing 3 copies. Before I would ever play a second copy of Kaisa Survivor, I would look at putting a 3rd copy of this card in instead. It's basically the same thing. There's really not a lot of ways that your opponent can play around your retreats, and it's not just good with Kaisa, it's also good with cards like Darius. It can't be overstated how good this card is with the Dreaming Tree. You get to just send your unit to the Dreaming Tree, recall it, ramp, and draw a card for just 1 mana. That's just so freaking powerful. I have found 2 works for me, and so that's what I played in my list. Next up is Pouty Poro. I only played 1 Pouty Poro. Typically in the 2-drop slot, a lot of people are playing the Ravenbloom Student and the Watchful Sentry as 3-ofs, and then you're playing some amount of either Pouty Poro or Legion Rearguard. I opted for 1 of each. The Pouty Poro is just a very solid unit with Deflect. The Deflect does come up in the mirror and randomly against things such as Gust or other cards like that. It can just make it a bit of a nuisance for your opponent, especially if they're a deck with a lot of interactions if you start with this guy. And so I think that 1 copy is fine. I was looking to play 8 2-drops in the deck, so this guy plus a Legion Rearguard is what I ended up on, but I could totally see you cutting this guy for more Legion Rearguards or cutting Legion Rearguards for more of this guy if you're expecting to play into a wider field of Kaisa and decks with more interaction spells. Next up, we've got Ravenbloom Student. This is like your premium 2-drop in the deck. You're super stoked to see this. You typically would like to start Watchful Sentry if you're going first. You don't really want to play your Student to the battlefield when it can just get traded over unless you're able to leave combat tricks up. But if you are able to leave combat tricks up, you definitely are happy to start with this because it can trade over your opponent's units and becomes really threatening with just like a Stupefy. And so usually in the really early turns, it's way too threatening and you should not attack into a Ravenbloom Student if your opponent has mana up. Just tips. One interaction you definitely need to be aware of is that if your opponent defies your spells, for instance, and they do not actually resolve, they are not considered played, so you will not get your Ravenbloom Student trigger if your spell is defied. Speaking of spells, let's talk about Falling Star. What can we say about Falling Star that hasn't already been said on this channel a million times? I consider this the 2nd best card in the game. I would not completely think that you are incorrect if you were to tell me that this is the best card in the game. I think that this card gatekeeps a lot of decks and a lot of strategies from even existing because of how many solid utility units are out there that are sitting at the 3 might and below threshold. This thing hits things at base, which is just one of the most powerful things that you can do in this game. There's not a lot of spells that hit at base, and when this thing only costs a single power versus actually setting you back a full turn of channeling, this just feels like it pulls you so far ahead. You can combine this with, say, Stupefy to kill a 4 might unit somewhere while still being able to deal 3 somewhere else. I'm sure if you've played any amount of games against this card already, you know what I'm talking about. This is just one of the best cards. You're never cutting this against pretty much anything. You always want to play max copies in every matchup, and this never gets boarded out. Last 2-cost card in the deck is Legion Rearguard. Again, as I mentioned, I was just looking to play 8 2-costs. I really want to make sure that when I'm going first that I'm seeing a turn 1 play. Some people I've heard of going to 9. The National Open list that just won the event was only playing 7, which seems a little low to me. I settled on 8, and I absolutely wanted access to at least 1 Legion Rearguard. The Accelerate on such a cheap unit is just really crucial in some matchups, especially if your opponent's like tapped out. This card can just actually win you the game and allow you to conquer both battlefields. Let's say your opponent only leaves you with 1 unit on the board, knowing that you can only conquer at 1 battlefield, meaning you won't be able to score your 8th point. And then now all of a sudden for 3 mana, here's this guy that can go take the open battlefield as well. You don't mind playing this guy just as a 2 for 2 either. That's still like an on rate, regular vanilla 2-drop. You're not stoked to play him in that way, but even when you do, it's fine as long as he can score you some points. He got the value that he needed to get you. Next up is Smokescreen. I was only playing 1 Smokescreen in the main, mostly because I was actually expecting to see a lot more Kaisa at this event than I ended up playing against. There was a fair amount of Kaisas that were in the event, and a large amount of them did make it to the top cut, but I only ended up playing 1 in Swiss. This card is not very good into Kaisa. You'll see in the winning list of the National Open as well, he was playing 0 of this card. This card is insane into so many decks except Kaisa. So if you're expecting to just see a sea of Kaisa and you're trying to have as many cards in your deck that are good against Kaisa as possible, then I could understand trimming this, but I still wanted access to at least 1 of these in game 1 because against nearly every other deck, this card is such a terror. -4 is just such a powerful combat trick. You could just completely blow out your opponent's units. You can basically make them skip their own turn while losing units if they end up committing to a battle that they shouldn't have if you had this card in your hand, and that happens a lot. Next up is Watchful Sentry. This is the 2-drop that we would like to see turn 1 the most. This guy replaces himself with a card whenever he dies while scoring you those crucial early points. You can use Stupefy to help him trade with other opponents' turn 1 plays. Just a really efficient 2-drop. This is usually the guy that you want to lead on. You're not really happy to play this in the mid game or later turns because unless your opponent is not holding at all, he's going to have a hard time taking battlefields. Next, we've got the Lecturing Yordle. This is a unit that you can play on turn 1 going second, which draws you a card. That's excellent. If you say have a Hextech Ray in your hand and you're going first, he allows you to develop a card, still leave that 1 mana up for the bolt, while still developing a body that draws you a card. Really good value, and his tank randomly can come in handy, especially when combined with cards like Cleave, like I mentioned earlier, which is an interaction I don't see too many people taking advantage of. But even say against like an 8 might unit, let's say you had this guy and a Thousand Tailed Watcher, you're able to send the Thousand Tailed Watcher with the little 2 might tank along with him. Now you are 9 to their 8. They normally would want to deal that 8 to your Thousand Tailed Watcher and take out your massive unit, but because they have to deal 2 to your tank, they can now only deal 6 to your Thousand Tailed Watcher, and he will survive by 1, and now you get to keep your Thousand Tailed Watcher. So that's just one instance of how the tank can be used, but it can come in handy. So consider his tank ability when calculating your math and how your opponent might trade on your units. Void Seeker is another excellent removal spell. This was a card that was cut from the National Open list that I thought was pretty interesting. I ended up trimming it to 2 because I was playing 2 Acathian Reigns in the main, but I could definitely see lists playing 3, and I don't think that it would be bad to play 3, especially if the field that you're expecting has a lot of smaller units, or if you're expecting like Kaisamirs, because this card perfectly answers the Kaisa champion unit. I was happy playing 2, and it came up a ton in my games. The only matchups where I was really siding this card out was against the big boy decks, and even then I would still keep maybe like 1 copy in because it could still help you trade up on things with like your Noxus Hopefuls, for instance. 1 Noxus Hopeful swinging into a battlefield with this spell is still able to deal 8 to something, which is able to take out almost every large bomb in the game. This spell is just great action speed removal. It replaces itself, which so many cards in Kaisa just seem to do, which turns this into a 2 for 1. Tons of value you're getting from this card, and it only costs 3. It's pretty easy to leave 3 up, especially on your Targon's Peak games. That basically means on any turn where you were normally going to be able to leave 1 energy up, if you conquer the Targon's Peak, you now have access to Void Seeker. Next up is the Noxus Hopeful. This is just a beat stick that comes in really cheap. You can play cheap spells like Cleave and then play this guy afterwards, or Stupefy and this guy, or even just a 2-cost unit and this guy, and on turn 2 that's a lot of pressure, that's a lot of units that you can play, and this guy's not easy to kill. This unit is another reason that you should be playing Voidseeker. Kaisa can't really deal with 4-might units that easily. Like, you would need a Stupefy plus a Bolt, or you have to dedicate an entire Falling Star to just one of those. So being able to develop a unit plus this makes your opponent's Falling Stars kind of awkward in the mirror, and you're really happy to have 4-might units against Kaisa. But even then, just being able to develop a 4-might unit for 2 is powerful against a lot of decks, not just Kaisa, and that's why this guy is a 3 of in the deck. 3 Darius is pretty standard for this deck. This is one of your best accelerate units. He's not really accelerate, he's like pseudo accelerate, but it's really easy to meet his accelerate conditions. This guy just hits so hard, coming in at 7 into battlefields. It's a really tricky number for your opponents to deal with, and if you can like stick this guy on a Reaver's row, he can get a ton of value. Even if he just gets to hold any battlefield, like you can pull him back to your base, play 2 cards. Now he's readied and big again, and he can go take the other battlefield by himself. There's so many good interactions with Darius. We already mentioned the cleave one as well, like just having a 10-might accelerated unit to be able to blow up any battlefield, even if it's stacked up with some sizable units. He's overall a pretty simple card, but a really effective one, and we're happy to have Darius in the deck. I don't really cut this out in any matchups at all. Next up, Thousand Tail Watcher. Again, this is another large unit that I enjoy having 3 copies of, and I don't really cut this out against anything. It's good against the big boy decks. It's good in the mirror because you struggle to deal with big units in the mirror. This is your best closer. It can also be combined with your damage removal spells. So like once a Watcher hits the board, you can use a Hextech Ray to kill now a 6-might unit for just 1. This is the best card in the game, but the way that it synergizes with Kaisa specifically, there's just so many interactions that make this card even better because of the might reduction in combination with damage-based removal, that the Thousand-Tailed Watcher is probably one of the best cards in your deck. I'm happy to have 3 copies of this. I don't really ever want to go down to less. Finally, I was on 2 Acathian Rain in the main. I was always a fan of playing at least one of this card in the main, and the more that I tested with it, the bigger a fan I became. Of course, the National Open winning list was playing 2 as well. This card absolutely destroys some matchups, things like Darius Hook or Victor, or other decks that just have a lot of small units. It's really hard for those decks to recover against a card that can 3-for-1 them or 4-for-1 them. I definitely won plenty of games doing that against my opponents. If your opponent is respecting this card, then you might not get quite as much value out of it. But even killing like 2 4-might units or 5-might units is still plenty valuable. You can also use this card to get lethals by clearing out battlefields with massive units and then pushing in small guys like Watchful Sentry. He could still get into a 12-might battlefield if you just deal 12 to it with this spell. You definitely want to be wary of targeting deflect units too many times with this, unless you're going for lethal. I did have to do that in one of my games against the Dead Bloom Predator, but you're typically not wanting to do that unless you absolutely are certain that you can win, because if you set yourself back too far as a tempo deck and you get blown out, it's likely that you're going to lose the game from that position. I don't think I sided this out in any of my matchups. I was really happy to have this card in my deck at all times. I think that 1 copy would also be fine, but I was a fan of having 2. That way, even if they play around the first one and I just get a mediocre one, then they're usually not playing around the second one and they'll play into it and get blown out. You also just don't really have a lot of spells that can deal with tall units, so even though it's a pretty expensive way to remove 1 unit from the board, I'm pretty happy to pay 7 to remove a 12-cost Volibear from the board, for instance. Going into the sideboard, I played an extra smokescreen in the sideboard. Again, like I said, this card is really good against so many matchups. I'm happy to have it against those matchups, but in the mirror and in a few other matchups, you don't really want copies of smokescreen in your deck. So I played 1 in the main, 1 in the side. In the matchups where it was really good, I brought in the extra one. In the matchups like Kaisa mirror, where it was not very good, I sided it out for a better one of like Progress Day. I played 2 Sprite Mothers. I think that this spot could be a lot of other things. I just ended up playing this card for the extra tempo, and I also thought that there might be a lot more aggressive decks because they're kind of cheap to put together. This card can help you take an early point lead and wall out an opponent from a battlefield because they're not really looking to trade into this unit. I brought this in against Darius Hook, and it definitely was a solid unit there. Didn't really get to see it do too much in the other games, though against the Aurora decks as well, I would say it was pretty respectable just as another accelerated way to gain points, which helps me take an even faster lead against those decks and put me in position to lethal them if they don't hit their Auroras or Dead Blooms off the top. I was on 3 Thermo Beams, even though this wasn't a proxy friendly event and Dazzling Aurora requires a lot of epic rares. I was still wary of that matchup. That is one of your worst matchups as Kaisa. You struggle in general with like dealing with really tall units, but Dazzling Aurora pulls all of its tall units out of the deck and summons them to the board every single turn. And if they're allowed to do that for too long without you being able to remove them, they will win the match through absolution in time. There's no real way for you to deal with that in your deck. So Thermo Beam just helps you hate them out. I ended up playing against 2 Dazzling Aurora, 1 in Swiss and 1 in Top Cut, and so I was very happy that I chose to play 3 copies of this card because I did end up seeing a lot of Dazzling Aurora, and it did come up and win me games against those decks. While yes, they still do get at least 1 trigger off of their Aurora, as long as you're able to answer it, you can deal with 1 tall body. Like, you can play Cleaves, you can play your smoke screens and stuff. Like, it's not hard for you to deal with 1 bomb, it's hard for you to deal with like 3 or 4. So as long as you can stop the bomb train with this card and then deal with their other unit, you should be in an okay position to win, especially with how many points you've been accumulating in the early turns. I played one of Progress Day. This card definitely felt really good in the mirror. Also felt good into Dazzling Aurora because you just have a lot of turns where they're not doing anything, so you don't mind taking a turn off to just get a handful of answers to any situation. 4 cards is a lot of cards. Like, this game, you just don't really draw cards in general, so drawing 4 is so many cards. I don't think I'd ever want to play more than one of this in my main or in my side, but I was happy to have access to one of this card. It performed very well. You want to bring this card into matchups where you're not trying to vomit your hand and you're actually trying to play for value and tempo over the long game, and this card can help you pull ahead in that race. And lastly, I was playing an extra copy of Void Seeker in the side. Like I said, this is great against the aggressive decks, this is great into the mirror. I brought this in against a lot of decks and I was really happy to have the extra copy in the side. I think that this could also be a flex slot though. I think that this could be other cards. Currently, I'm trying out a Dr. Mundo in this spot, and he's been doing great in that spot as well, especially into the mirror match. Okay, now that we're moving to the matchup section, I'm going to just go ahead and cover each of my matchups at the event. I actually did play against a different deck every single round, so I'll cover the matchups that I played in every round. I do not have access to the original deck lists. I do not believe those were posted anywhere by Laughing Dragon. I could be wrong, but I believe I'm the only one that's posted my list anywhere from what I've seen, but I will give you some example deck lists to look at while I'm talking about these different matchups. Deck lists that I think are good and should be solid examples of those deck lists. So my round 1, I was definitely not stoked to face against. That was Master Yi on Dazzling Aurora. Dazzling Aurora is my worst matchup by far, and Master Yi is probably the strongest variant of it, mostly because he has access to counterspells and to cards like Zonya's Hourglass to save his massive units if I combine a bunch of cards in my hand to even be able to kill one in the first place. In my tournament, this matchup actually ended up in a draw for me. We were not able to finish all 3 games. We ended up going into game 3 with like 6 minutes left of time, and when time was called, he was literally the final turn of the game. I was ahead in points, and he was able to flip a Dead Bloom Predator off of a Dazzling Aurora to tie us up in points on the final turn of the game, which gave me my first draw. So still better than a loss, but not as good as a win, of course. In the Dazzling Aurora matchup, you're really just wanting to be the aggressor here. You're wanting to send as many units out as possible to score as many points as possible every single turn. You're willing to sacrifice some units for point tempo because you really need to get on the board ASAP and get as many points as possible before they can actually play the Dazzling Aurora, because once it comes down, it's going to be an uphill battle for you unless you scored a lot of points early. If you did manage to score a lot of points early though, and if they didn't flip the Aspirant's Climb or even on Aspirant's Climb, as long as you're not dealing with like a turn 3 Aurora, you usually can come out on top. Even turn 4 Aurora isn't that great. Like, you can beat those decks, especially if they're going second. The main way to approach this matchup is just to keep a lot of early game units in your hands, in your mulligans. You want to make sure you're keeping a 2-drop. and have a plan every turn to be able to develop something so that you can ensure that you're scoring maximum amount of points. After sideboards, you want to put in things like Sprite Mothers, which help you gain even more point tempo. Like if you're going first, for instance, you can actually score a point with your first 2-drop and then play Sprite Mother on 4 energy to score the other point as well, starting you off at 2, which is a huge break point in this game unless you're on Aspirant's Climb. But even on Aspirant's Climb, you'd be happy to have 2 points on the second turn of the game. That's as many points as you can possibly score in this game as quickly as possible. So just try to rush those points. There's not really a big need for committing massive amounts of units into the battlefields unless they're really behind and there's no way that like a Deadbloom Predator off the top can cook you. Then you're okay to stack up the battlefield if you have enough big boys, especially if you've got like extra spells to back it up. But otherwise you're just sending in and pulling back every turn. And ideally, before the Deadbloom turn or before the Aurora turn, you would like to have all your units pulled back so that if they do flip a Deadbloom Predator off the top, it can't go into a battlefield. They have to play it back at the base, so it isn't able to contest you, it isn't able to eat your unit, and they still have nothing at those battlefields. So even though they've now gotten online and got their first bomb online, they can't block you, so you're able to score 2 more points with your units the following turn. For sideboarding, you want to put in the thermal beams and you want to put in the Sprite Mothers. I would also bring in the smoke screen here. I'd be looking to cut some Hextech Rays, potentially a retreat or 2. You cannot give this deck too much time, so just again remember, be sure to be the aggressor, be sure to push points early. Even if normally you would not want to give up some units, you might have to do so in order to get those points and be able to get there as quickly as possible so that when your opponent finally does start flipping bombs, it's only 1 or 2 that you have to deal with and get on top of, and then you're able to win the game from there. Round 2, I played against Sett. Sett is definitely a matchup that can be tough for Kaisa depending on how they start. Our main way of gaining advantage through our removal spells is kind of negated by Sett. We end up just spending a bunch of mana, and all he has to do is spend 1 single power to send his big unit back. He creates pretty sizable units too, so it's not like we're just going 1 for 1 on these trades. Like we're usually having to spend 2 cards to deal with one of his big units if it's got a buff on it, and that can be a nightmare for us. Fiora is a really tough card for this deck to deal with, especially if you don't have Smokescreen. And even with Smokescreen, you're still going to have to pay a deflect cost to target her at least the first time, but her deflect can really be a nuisance for this deck. Same thing for Kiana, but Fiora's got much better numbers and can gank between battlefields. So if your opponent plays, say, like a Judgment on you and just has only a Fiora and another decent size unit out, like that Fiora by herself can just solo you by moving from battlefield to battlefield, defending for 6 and having deflect, and you just don't have nearly enough runes to deal with her. It's a pretty tough unit for you to deal with. But Sett's ability overall is just tough for you to deal with. Like I said, just having access to Zhonya's Hourglass kind of every single turn for a power is really strong. Sometimes they can use it multiple times if they're able to get multiple conquers and ready. My advice would be to try to take point tempo early, try to use your damage spells to make trades with smaller units that you don't mind sacrificing. You don't want to be trading out like your Kaisa champion units, but you definitely don't mind trading out like Ravenbloom students for bigger units. And if you can get those buffs off of them, and if they don't have something like Arena Bar to keep giving them back, it's not as if Sett has an infinite way to give buffs. So without their Pit Rookies or their Kinko Monks, their non-Sett brawler units don't have ways to buff themselves. So what you're typically trying to do is set up some kind of play where you're able to force them to spend the buff. You're able to hit their big unit with like a Falling Star, or you're able to take their board with an Acathian Rain and they're not able to save anything. As far as sideboards go, you're definitely bringing in the Smokescreen against this deck. I don't think that this is a deck that you have a lot of time against. So again, cards like Sprite Mother, Void Seeker, and Smokescreen I'm happy to bring in. Retreat isn't doing much for you in this matchup, so I'm happy to trim on those. Round 3, I ended up playing against Darius Hook. Thankfully, my opponent did not draw his hooks, so this matchup was pretty easy to seal up with a few Falling Stars. These decks don't draw a lot of cards, so if you're able to run them out of their resources, which is what you're trying to do, then you're usually able to win. Against all of these aggressive matchups, whether it be Darius, whether it be Annie, whether it be Jinx, A lot of these decks are just playing really small units. You're able to like 2-for-1 with your value spells, and that's really how you're supposed to win these games, is through attrition. You're actually not really supposed to play as the aggressor here. You don't need to be tapping out and playing a whole big board. All you have to do really is just hold up your removal spells and prevent them from taking points as many turns as possible. They don't draw a lot of cards, and they will run out of cards, especially if you hit them with like an Acathian Rain, which is how I won one of my games against the Darius. It's just lights out if you hit them with like a 5-for-1. As far as sideboarding for this matchup, the Sprite Mothers were really good in this matchup because the 3 might token walls out units so effectively, and their units are usually 2 or 3 might or small 1 might recruits, so you're able to force them to either trade or ignore that battlefield, which sets them back in point tempo. Either way, all of those things are good for you, so Sprite Mother was an all-star there. You bring in the Void Seeker for sure, because again, we're just trying to run our opponent out of cards, out of units to be able to score points with. Being able to do that at action speed prevents them from scoring the point, as well as takes the card off their board. And of course, Void Seeker draws you a card, so you just get super ahead when you get to cast one of these. Smokescreen is also fine here, though they can hidden blade you, so if you do smokescreen them out and they hidden blade you, you're not feeling super great because you just lost your smokescreen, but at least you still go +1 because you get to draw 2 cards. But in tempo, you're not really going +1, so just something to be aware of with those decks. But I'd still bring smokescreen in. Main thing you're looking to cut again is the retreats. You don't really need too many of these. And same thing for the cleaves. You still want a few of these, but you can start trimming cleaves as well after you're out of the Dreaming Tree. Next up, I played Kaisa in round 4, ended up taking this one 2-0. The Kaisa mirror is a bit tricky. Some of your cards, especially like your combat tricks, don't end up working, because if you use your combat tricks to try to get a higher might than your opponent, then they'll just use a removal spell, and now you used your combat tricks to try to help your unit win on the defense, and then you just got blown out because they still were able to kill your unit with a spell, and they're still conquering the point. So a lot of the times, holding and defending is not something that you're going to be doing in the Kaisa mirror. You also really want to be wary of Acathian Rain. Of course, not everybody is on this card in the main. Some people are not playing this card at all, but if they are, you cannot play your whole hand into that card. You really need to hold back, even if you have a really nice turn where you could like set up 2 Noxus Hopefuls plus a 2-drop or something. Like Acathian Rain wipes out that whole board and can still take out an additional 2-drop, or like a Lecturing Yord, or like they can 4-for-1 you, and that's how you start to fall behind in the Kaisa mirror. So you don't want to be using all your units. You really need to be able to take points and threaten points every turn, and they're just trying to clear your bodies out with every removal spell that they have in their disposal. So it just kind of becomes an attrition game. You really just want to make sure that you're keeping your accelerate units and your Dariuses. Those are really important in this matchup. Same thing for Thousand Tail Watcher. Again, it's a massive unit, so it's really hard for Kaisa to deal with that. Retreat is great in this matchup. It's the way that you can keep abusing your Kaisa and force your opponent's answers out of their hand and just basically kind of counterspell them. Of course, you're losing 4 energy worth of development, so it's not exactly as good as a counterspell, but on the Dreaming Tree, of course, you're getting to draw 1, so you're not even going down in cards. And then Kaisa is going to keep drawing you more cards. Retreats can also pull back your Dariuses and your Thousand Tail Watchers, which can help just keep swinging the tempo back in your favor. Retreat is an absolute all-star in this matchup. Your cleaves are pretty crappy. Of course, you can cut them all, and you will cut them all post-board after the Dreaming Tree game, but during the Dreaming Tree game, they're still like acceptable. I mean, 1 mana, cantrip, draw a card is not too bad, but because we're never really defending points with units, and we're never really supposed to be attacking into battlefields with units unless our opponent is tapped out because of all the combat tricks, you're rarely ever getting to actually be in combat, so the assault almost never does anything. And you can't use this at an open battlefield, notably to like pump a guy above a kill spell, because if there's nothing at the battlefield, you are not considered battling, and so assault and shield don't work. In this matchup, I'm bringing in the Progress Day, the Sprite Mothers, and the Void Seeker. I'm cutting the Cleaves and the Smokescreen. Going into round 5, I knew that I would be able to take a draw with my opponent, because you can intentionally draw in this game. So both of us agreed to take a draw, which guaranteed that I would be locked in for top 8. Moving into top 8, my first opponent was Dazzling Aurora Misfortune this time. This matchup can be just as hard as the Yi one, and they have some cards that can hurt you even more than Yi, like the Mind Splitter, which can pull your Foxes out of your hand, your Thousand Tail Watcher, or just any good trick that you have. You're a Cathian range, just whatever you have to answer their board. Mind Splitter is just such a menace for you, and all their big units, of course, are menaces for you. Thankfully, during my first game against my opponent, he just did not see the Aurora. That is one of the downsides of Dazzling Aurora, even though Misfortune is one of the most consistent versions of that deck, playing multiple stack decks and other cards that can cycle and draw cards. He still didn't see it pretty much the entire first game, and game 2, when he finally did see it, I was able to use a smokescreen on his Deadbloom Predator, which was coming down on my Kaisa battlefield, to help my Kaisa trade on his Deadbloom Predator when he tapped out for his Dazzling Aurora and flipped Deadbloom. And then coming into my turn, I was able to use the Thermal Beam to take out the Aurora. So then he was just stuck hard casting units from his hand for the rest of the game, and I was able to take them out with a Cathian Reigns plus Cleaves and get there for the win. Same thing against all Aurora decks. You want to bring in the Smokescreen, the Thermal Beams, Sprite Mother, and Progress Day. In top 4, the other players ended up approaching me to ask if I would like to split the pot. At that point, I felt that that was a pretty good deal. Basically, all of us were walking away with second place winnings, and I did have the most player points by the end of it. So in final standings, I did end up coming in first place, as the player with the most match points, still remaining undefeated and only dropping a single game all day to Dazzling Aurora Yi in my first round. It was a great feeling, and I cannot wait to go to the Vegas 10K in a few weeks, the Houston Regional, of course, and the PPG event going on in Orlando, the 20K, to see if I can recreate the same success, and hopefully my teammates can as well. And with that, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a like and share it with your friends. Let us know if you have any questions down in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. We'll see you soon. Challenger TCG now has a Metafy. Wow. If you would like to support our content so we can continue doing what we are doing, then please consider subscribing to any of our Metafy tiers. Not only will you be supporting more content like this, but you will also gain access to our community Discord, where we do live streams, Riftbound product giveaways, host VODs of our competitive testing sessions, and offer one-on-one coaching sessions. The members of our team are seasoned veterans of the competitive TCG world and have seen multiple successes across a variety of games. We also have written deck guide content available for free right now, and will be providing additional guides at no cost in the future. So check us out, even if you can't subscribe, if you are looking for high quality competitive content.